The courtroom was packed long before the judge arrived. Journalists lined the back wall, whispering into microphones. Lawyers shuffled stacks of documents. Curious spectators leaned forward, eager to witness another ugly divorce involving millions of dollars. At the center of it all sat Daniel Carter, a 42-year-old retired U.S. Marine Corps veteran. His navy blue suit was old but spotless. His silver military lapel pin was the only decoration he wore. His hands rested calmly on the table. Across from him sat his estranged wife, Rebecca Carter, dressed in an expensive designer outfit that screamed wealth and confidence. Next to her sat one of the city's most feared divorce attorneys, Richard Hale, famous for destroying opponents inside the courtroom. Rebecca glanced toward Daniel with complete disgust. To her, he wasn't the decorated Marine she had married 20 years ago. He was simply a man she wanted erased from her life. The bailiff announced, "All rise." Everyone stood as Judge Ethan Morgan entered the courtroom. He was respected across the state for being fair, impossible to intimidate, and brutally honest. No one expected today's hearing to become the most unforgettable case of his career. After everyone sat, Judge Morgan adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Carter, your attorney may begin." Richard Hale stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client sacrificed 20 years supporting this marriage, while Mr. Carter contributed almost nothing after leaving the military." Daniel didn't react. Hale continued, "My client requests full ownership of the family mansion, both vacation homes, 60% of all investments, and permanent alimony." The courtroom murmured. Judge Morgan looked toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter, your response?" Daniel quietly replied, "My attorney will answer, Your Honor." His lawyer, Sarah Bennett, stood. "Your Honor, we reject every demand." Rebecca suddenly laughed loudly. "Reject?" She looked directly at Daniel. "You LDN't even keep a real job after the Marines." The courtroom became silent. Then she stood without permission. "Your Honor." She pointed toward Daniel. "He's just a worthless veteran who lives in the past." Gasps spread across the room. Even Richard Hale looked slightly uncomfortable. Judge Morgan frowned. "Mrs. Carter, sit down." But she ignored him. "He spent years pretending to be some hero." She laughed again. "The only reason people respect him is because of an old uniform." Daniel remained completely calm. His eyes never left the judge. Rebecca wasn't finished. "I built our business. I made the money." He was nothing but dead weight. Judge Morgan struck his gavel. "Enough." Rebecca finally sat, still smiling confidently. She believed she had already won. Judge Morgan turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter, would you like to respond?" The courtroom waited. Daniel slowly stood. He adjusted his jacket. Instead of looking at Rebecca, instead of looking at her lawyer, he stared directly into Judge Morgan's eyes. For several long seconds, he said absolutely nothing. Then, a small smile appeared on his face. Softly, almost like an old memory, he asked, "Morgan, do you remember me?" The entire courtroom looked confused. Judge Morgan froze. His pen slipped from his hand. The color drained from his face. He leaned forward, staring at Daniel as though he had seen a ghost. Then, very slowly, his eyes widened. His breathing became uneven. Whispers spread through the courtroom. "What is happening? Does the judge know him?" Rebecca frowned. Richard Hale stopped taking notes. Judge Morgan suddenly stood up from the bench. His voice trembled. "Oh my God." He stared at Daniel in disbelief. "Is that really you?" The courtroom fell into complete silence. Judge Ethan Morgan remained standing behind the bench, staring at Daniel Carter as if the years between them had suddenly disappeared. His hands trembled. His eyes searched Daniel's face, looking beyond the gray hair and the faint scars that age had added. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Sergeant Carter?" Daniel gave a slight nod. "It's been a long time, Morgan." A wave of confusion swept through the courtroom. Rebecca looked from her husband to the judge. "What is going on?" she whispered to her attorney. Richard Hale shrugged. Even he had no idea. Judge Morgan removed his glasses and slowly stepped down from the bench, something he had never done during a hearing. He stopped just a few feet from Daniel. "I thought you were dead." Daniel smiled sadly. "So did a lot of people." The judge took a deep breath before turning back toward the courtroom. "I need everyone here to understand something." His voice was no longer that of a judge. It was the voice of a man remembering the darkest day of his life. 23 years ago, before I ever went to law school, I served as a milita. Why prosecutor in the Marine Corps? The room became perfectly still. I was deployed overseas with several units. He looked directly at Daniel. One night our convoy was ambushed. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Judge Morgan continued. Our vehicles were surrounded. We were outnumbered. Communications were destroyed. We believed none of us would survive. His voice cracked. Then Sergeant Daniel Carter volunteered to stay behind. The spectators leaned forward. He ordered the rest of us to evacuate while he covered our escape. Daniel looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Judge Morgan continued. He held off the attackers alone for nearly 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes saved every person in that convoy. A gasp echoed across the courtroom. Judge Morgan pointed toward Daniel. I am standing here today because of that man. Rebecca's confident smile disappeared. She stared at Daniel in disbelief. No, she whispered. That's impossible. Daniel quietly replied. I never talked about it. Judge Morgan nodded. He refused every interview. He refused publicity. He even rejected several television appearances. He told the military that the men who came home mattered more than the man who stayed behind. The courtroom was silent. One elderly veteran sitting in the gallery wiped tears from his eyes. Richard Hale slowly stood. Your Honor, with respect, if this story is true, why has no one ever heard about it? Judge Morgan smiled. Because Sergeant Carter signed confidentiality agreements related to the operation. He never sought recognition. He simply went home and built a life. He paused. Or at least, he tried to. Rebecca suddenly laughed nervously. So what? He still hasn't worked in years. He still depended on me. Daniel finally looked directly at her. For years, I managed your father's business. I expanded it from 3 stores to 32. Rebecca's expression froze. Daniel continued calmly. When your father became ill, I handled every contract, every investment, every acquisition. You attended charity galas. I worked. Rebecca shook her head. That's a lie. Daniel's attorney, Sarah Bennett, stood. No, Mrs. Carter. It's documented. She placed several thick binders on the evidence table. Financial records, emails, corporate resolutions, signed contracts, bank authorizations, board meeting minutes, everything. Richard Hale's confidence began to crumble as he flipped through the documents. His face turned pale, very pale. He whispered, Rebecca, you told me none of this existed. She couldn't answer. Sarah wasn't finished. She pressed a button on the courtroom monitor. A large screen lit up. It displayed thousands of emails. Every major business decision over the last 15 years carried the same digital signature. Daniel Carter. Inv. Investment strategies. Expansion plans. Negotiations. Crisis management. Even the company's record-breaking merger. All prepared by Daniel. Rebecca slowly sank into her chair. This can't be happening. Judge Morgan returned to the bench. His expression had changed completely. This court has now learned that Mr. Carter's military service and business contributions appear to have been deliberately minimized. He looked toward Rebecca. If these documents are authentic, you may have provided false testimony under oath. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Rebecca's lawyer closed the last binder. He looked at his client with growing concern. For the first time since the hearing began, Richard Hale realized they weren't winning. They were walking straight into disaster. And Daniel Carter still hadn't revealed his biggest secret. The courtroom was silent. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Every eye was fixed on Daniel Carter. Judge Morgan adjusted his glasses and looked towards Sarah Bennett. Ms. Bennett, you mentioned Mr. Carter still has one final piece of evidence. Sarah nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It changes everything. Rebecca swallowed hard. Richard Hale leaned toward her and whispered, Rebecca, is there anything you haven't told me? She shook her head nervously. No. But this time, her voice lacked confidence. Sarah walked to the evidence table and placed a thick, sealed envelope before the judge. Your Honor, inside are certified corporate records, tax filings, ownership documents, and one video deposition. Judge Morgan opened the envelope. His eyebrows rose. These documents have been certified by the Secretary of State? Yes, Your Honor. They've also been verified by independent forensic accountants. The courtroom waited. Judge Morgan turned the first page, then the second, then the third. Suddenly, he stopped reading. He looked directly at Rebecca. Mrs. Carter, Did you testify under oath that you founded Carter Holdings? Yes. And that your husband had no ownership interest? Yes. Judge Morgan slowly held up a document. This certificate says otherwise. Sarah pressed another button. The courtroom monitor displayed the official incorporation papers of Carter Holdings, LLC. At the top of the page were two names: founder and majority owner, Daniel Carter, 72%. Minority owner, Rebecca Carter, 28%. The room erupted in gasps. Rebecca's face turned white. She stared at the screen. No, that's impossible. Daniel remained calm. Sarah spoke clearly. When Mr. Carter returned from military service, he invested his entire retirement savings and military pension into starting the company. He also mortgaged the only house he owned. Mrs. Carter was added as a minority partner after the business became profitable. Richard Hale, S.L. Owley lowered his head. He whispered, "You told me. You built this company." Rebecca couldn't answer. Judge Morgan continued reading. There are also records showing Mr. Carter transferred millions of dollars into charitable foundations supporting wounded veterans, military widows, and children's hospitals. Sarah nodded. Over the past 10 years, he donated more than $18 million. The courtroom stared at Daniel. A reporter quietly whispered, "18 million." Judge Morgan smiled. And yet there isn't a single interview, photograph, or press release about these donations. Daniel simply said, "I didn't do it for attention." Sarah then said, "Your Honor, we'd like to play the final exhibit." The lights dimmed. A pre-recorded video appeared on the screen. It showed an elderly man sitting in a hospital bed. Judge Morgan immediately recognized him. Mr. William Carter, Daniel's late father-in-law. The recording had been made just 3 months before his passing. The old man looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means Rebecca and Daniel are no longer together." He paused to catch his breath. "There is something my daughter never knew." He held up a folder. "Legally, I transferred my shares to Daniel, not Rebecca." The courtroom froze. "I love my daughter, but Daniel earned my trust. He saved this family. He saved this company. And if anyone deserves to lead it, it's him." The video ended. Rebecca broke down. She buried her face in her hands. "I didn't know," she whispered through tears. "I swear, I didn't know." Richard Hale slowly stood. He looked exhausted. Then, before anyone expected it, he turned toward Judge Morgan. "Your Honor, my client failed to disclose critical facts to this court. I respectfully request permission to withdraw several of our claims." The courtroom gasped. Judge Morgan nodded. "Request noted." Richard Hale then looked at Daniel. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I argued against a man I didn't truly know." Daniel extended his hand. "No hard feelings." Hale shook it. Judge Morgan picked up his gavel. "This court has reviewed the evidence." He paused. "It is clear Mr. Daniel Carter did not hide assets, deceive his spouse, or neglect his responsibilities. The evidence instead shows years of honorable military service, extraordinary business leadership, and remarkable generosity." He turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Carter, this court finds that several statements made under oath were false or materially misleading. The matter will be referred for further legal review." Rebecca quietly lowered her head. Judge Morgan smiled warmly at Daniel. "Sergeant Carter, I've waited 23 years to say this." He stood. The entire courtroom followed. One by one, the attorneys stood. The reporters stood. The spectators stood. Even the bailiff stood. Judge Morgan raised his hand in salute. "Thank you for your service." Daniel returned the salute. "I was only doing my duty, Your Honor." The courtroom erupted into applause. As Daniel walked toward the exit, reporters rushed after him. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say?" He stopped at the courthouse doors and smiled. "Never judge a person's worth by the battles you can't see." With those words, he stepped into the sunlight and walked away, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a veteran whose dignity, integrity, and truth had finally been recognized.